Now we see what are the issues that we face with modernity. We were promised progress, but then what we had was war and bombs. And how many lives were actually destroyed by the technology? 19th and 18th centuries, particularly 20th century, technology was used. And even today, at the cost of poverty, the technological rationalization is very much used as a warring mechanism. And so there is a loss of hope and a sense of anxiety in the autonomous man or human or woman. And so the fear of new world order, economic security, and sexual morality are different and odd ideas that emerge. So we become like them in terms of idols is very much the technology and the modernity and the science. I myself, as a scientist, am very much appreciative of science, and every question, everything that I agree with science, but the science is always an open-ended question, but it always keeps until it is proved as an open-ended option. Either it should be proved or disproved. But then some people take science as the end of everything. They keep it above God. They think that science has disproved God already. And science has disproved any spirituality. As a scientist, I don't think that is what the science has done. Science has proved what it could be and discovered what they could, but at the same time, it is also humbles itself that there are many things to discover, including God, through the scientific methods. But those who make science as idol, they become like them or technology. And this is what Isaiah chapter 46 would say. And even Psalm 115 would say, those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. Their idols are silver and gold made by the hands of men. So it's the kind of the myth that is promised by the modernity to be a world of gold, a world of diamond, a world of progress, replacing God, but it has not happened. And Jeremiah too, he challenges in his book, chapter 10, in a similar way. And so the changing realities are quite common. And so reality is seen as a human construct and a social construct in a more critical world today. But then we come to scientific objectivity, that is to master the world once for all by enclosing it within an illusory but absolute system which represents or corresponds to a unitary being beyond history, particularity, and change. Mastering means to legitimate any conquest or political superiority and masters and possessors of nature. This is quite interesting. I'm going to interpret this in a different way. It's very interesting that people claim to have the grand narrative that can be used to explain people. So when the world was looked at it, and it was looked at from a Western perspective, like aliens or Indians or Chinese or Africans, they were explained in a completely different way with a narrative. Through some examples and selective evidences, that were proved to be the general observation without even understanding what is behind some of these activities, or even digging into asking people what they mean, what they really meant within their scope of understanding and worldview and practices. But then what was understood to be is from a particular perspective, which is thought to be rationally justified, and it has gone through Renaissance, and it has gone through reformed ideas, through rational thinking. So all the other ideas fell outside, and so they are inferior, and they are to be conquested, or they are to be overruled or dominated in order to bring them, and they can be controlled and subjugated in order to bring change among them. So for this is a grand narrative. The grand narrative, the grand narrative existed, which supported and legitimized institutions, which also supported individual authority and power and control over others' dominance. So there comes the postmodernity, challenging all these things. And the postmodernity is is explained using a kaleidoscope. We saw a telescope, microscope, and now we have kaleidoscope, and ever-changing mosaic pieces of broken glasses that is beautiful when the light shines through it. So the reality around us is seen more as a evolving process, understood through brokenness and interrelationships. This is quite a radical shift, because the postmodernity thinks that there is ever-changing narratives, or the grand narratives, or grand narratives, not one single narrative. There can be many perspective views from different point of view. So the tenets of postmodernity are reacting to all tenets of modernity, that is the reaction. Reject the idea of objective truth, there's no possibility. And thus, thereby, the objective truth does not lead to the grand narrative. Suspicious and skeptical of all authorities, family, government, and society, in search of identity apart from knowledge, but through relationship, relational factor begins to play much important here. Less morality, only expediency, in search of transcendence to experience others. I'm not supporting postmodernity, but I'm just explaining what it is. I think Bishop Newbegin has already spoken much about it. In this context, Bishop Newbegin would say, oh, modernity does not have much space for faith because it eliminates everything else outside reasoning. He was a little sympathetic to postmodernity because it at least provides some space as one of the narratives among many other narratives. But he was also critical of postmodernity, of course. But then the postmodernity is also explained as a suspicion of big stories of progress. It questions, or is it the stories that lead to myths of progress or development, but rather it happens ecological disaster. And there also the voices from the margins, how they can deconstruct the main grand narrative and see what are the subaltern meanings, or what are the subaltern narratives that exist that can deconstruct the main grand narrative. And we therefore come clean with the church's past, because churches have sadly claimed to be recent, rational, and also subordinated other cultures and institutionalized the power. And the power helped them to promote Christianity as the most advanced, reformed, and the best religion of the world. And it was imposed on others. And thereby we have to examine ourselves for the oppressive tendencies that we have had and search for the signs of syncretism between modernity and Christian faith. And so the big stories are construction of those in power, but to build to legitimize and preserve that power. And that's what the grand narratives are often done. They look and say, this is the grand narrative. This is the grand narrative that one has to hold. And if we are convinced, everyone should be convinced. And if the others are not convinced, we should bring under our power and legitimize the power using that narrative. No favors to elders due to ecological disasters live for today. So sadly, the elders did not understand it because of the ecological disasters. And so we have to counter it. And so it's completely a freedom to choose any truths. If a group of young people believe and persuade it, and they felt it is right, they accept it, and they think that is what truth for them, whether others accept or not, and they keep it. And there is a possibility of alternative or counter narratives, which also promote global awareness, ecological destruction, human rights, destruction of ethnical culture, and racial and religious intolerance, sexual discrimination, and abuse of animals. These are many counter narratives that have come in order to bring awareness among people about the margins and the people and the animals that are often not thought to be serious in our narratives. So let me compare between modernity and postmodernity. Modernity, romantic view of life, have a purpose. It has a design, it has a hierarchy, word oriented, a complete work, analysis from the distance, creation and synthesis, metaphysics. A father knows best. That's the ancient tradition. That's true, being a father. And postmodernity is absurd view of life, play instead, chance, anarchy, silence oriented, work in progress, analysis through participating, deconstruction or antithesis, irony. The Simpsons program is very much in that direction. So from modern to postmodern, it's a modernity was to control and conquest, much more mechanistic in organizing, analytical, secular, and scientific, knowing God. Postmodernity is conservation, organic, it's ecological, holistic, and passionate, spiritual, scientific, experiencing God. Interesting. So I'll come next in this next one. How do we do mission in the postmodern context with some examples of discipleship making?